fishing, it's in my soul.
Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Guys, gals, veterans, active military duty, civilians, whoever you might be, I urge you to listen to this entire episode. It is certainly one of the most powerful episodes we've ever done here at Salt Strong Unchurched. Tony Prescott, the whole story blows me away of having to watch a best friend die right next to you, going back into battle after being discharged, and having to deal with coming back as a civilian with a wife and kids and trying to basically start over. And then his challenges with God and faith and the nightmares and the dreams that just won't seem to go away. These scenes that keep reappearing from his time over there in the Middle East. I'm going to read off a couple of awards that he has won because we didn't get to talk about it in this episode. But he was the Counterintelligence Agent of the Year by the Department of Defense, 3 Bronze Stars medals, 1 with V Device for Valor, a Purple Heart, Defense Service Medals, all kinds of service medals, Joint Service Medal, the Army Accommodation Medal, the Joint Military Unit Award. You'll find out real quickly why Tony was awarded this. Please, please, please listen to the entire thing. And at the end, all I ask is to share it. Enjoy. Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like diamonds. We are back. This is going to be a powerful one. Got an email from my boy here, Tony. I'm looking at it down here below if you're watching on video. We are doing this on video as well. I got to warn you, there might be a few tears shed. I was getting emotional even reading this. And the title, as you saw, is when God uses fishing to heal a warrior. And Tony here is one of our members. I didn't know your whole story. I knew you had been through a lot. You have all kinds of awards, including Purple Heart. And when I read your email about what you went through in Afghanistan and what you saw and lost best friends right next to you and your challenges with God and getting through that and why me, why him, why us, man, dude, it gave me goosebumps. So I'm so pumped to have you on the show.
Well, I'm honored to be here, Joe. I'm excited about sharing my story with you.
So what's the quick background on you? How long you been in the Army? How'd you get in? What's the story?
Came out of high school as a big athlete, and the recruiter convinced me I needed to jump out of airplanes and be an infantryman, all hua. So I did that out of high school and did that for a few years. And then I realized that I wanted to use my brain instead of my back by carrying all those rucksacks. So I went into a field of counterintelligence, and I've been doing that now for about 24 years. Cool.
And yeah, you got sent abroad, it sounds like. Once or twice?
Yeah, I've got about 40 hard months of combat time in Iraq, Afghanistan.
Wow.
So that's kind of, it's not something you sign up for when you first come in, and I remember hearing a lot of my buddies say, we're just going to do this for the college money and then we're going to punch out and do our thing. But, I just love the military lifestyle. I always felt like I had a calling to do something that's bigger than me. And so the Army has really provided that for me.
And were you married and kids and any of this when all that was going on with the deployment?
Actually, I was not married when I first came out of high school. Obviously, kind of a longer story is that I actually came in. I was medically retired out of the Army when I was 22. They had gone in and taken my left lung out. And so I was medically discharged. And then I decided, since the Army's not going to work for me, I went to college, got my degree, and I went overseas and worked for NATO in Italy. I speak fluent Italian. I did some work with the Italians over there and the American soldiers. And then I got a job working in Egypt for the United Nations. So I was in Egypt working for the United Nations, and that's where I met my beautiful wife, Sherry. She was there, and we met. She's American. She was visiting. And 3 months later, we were engaged. 6 months later, we were married. And I left the UN and came back to the States. And literally 4 months later, 9/11 took place.
Wow.
And the guy that I was working for the UN reached out to me and said, "Hey, listen, do you want to get back in the fight? This is going to be a long one." And I said, "Well, I'd love to, but I'm disabled. I have a disability. They took my lung out." He said, "That's not what I asked. Do you want to get back in the fight?" and I speak Arabic, Russian, Italian. And so I said, sure. And within literally about a month, I was swearing in again, and I came back in. So after 9/11, I was in it. And 4 months later, I was in a little place in Iraq in Tikrit with a special forces unit doing intel work and some interesting things.
All right, you kind of glanced over this little. I lost a lung. Like what happened?
Well, it's actually a really long, funny story, but I'll just make it really short. We did an exercise in Grafenberg, Germany in the wintertime, and a lot of your viewers, if they've ever experienced the military, they understand if you're in the infantry, if you can't run, sprint, jump, and shoot, then you're considered someone that shouldn't be in the unit. And I got sick up in Graf. It was like bitter cold, sleet, snow. We were in the field for about 30 straight days. A lot of the guys were getting sick, but I was a team leader, so I decided to stick it out. And what happened, I ended up developing walking pneumonia, and then I started losing weight, and things were going downhill. And it turns out, long story, I had to get medevac to Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, and they went in and had to do exploratory surgery because whatever it was on my lung was spreading. And they had to go in and remove it. When they cut into my lung, it just fell to pieces, and they had to remove it.
Wow.
What it was, the gist of the story is, in Germany, there's a parasite. About 1 out of every million Germans get it, and it eats lung tissue. And I had the walking pneumonia, which had already weakened my lung, and then this parasite got into my chest and ate up my lung. So yeah, that's kind of how that happened, and so that's why I was medically retired back in when I was a 22-year-old kid.
So at this point, you could have just claimed disability and done that. You're medically discharged. You go back in. And you're now married. You're now married at this point.
I am now married at this point. Yes, and
kids too.
We had an 8-month-old Savannah at the time. And I will tell you, it was a very difficult decision. And I was making really good living in what I was doing. I was doing corporate security for a big company, and I told my wife, if I do this, it's going to be a massive pay cut. Our lifestyles are going to change. She wasn't real kosher with the idea. Her parents were certainly not kosher with the idea. But I just felt like this was God's calling. It was like, it was a burning desire in my heart. I just knew that this is what I was supposed to do. But I told my wife, if there's some kind of a sign or something to tell me, then this is what we're going to do. And then I got a call from the retired general officer that I worked with for the United Nations. Said, listen, I know you're retired, but do you want to get back in this fight? And I said, absolutely. So he made some phone calls. Literally a congressman got involved. They waived my disability, and then they brought me back in.
Wow. All right. So take us over there, man. What,
Okay. Well, the first deployment was, obviously my first introduction to Iraq, and I was a counter-intel specialist. I was a targeteer. Basically, I would help develop targeting packages for the SEAL team that was out there doing the kicking in the doors and rolling up targets, objectives. And so as the target expert, I would put these packages together, and I would go with them on some of the raids. And this one in particular was I'd been in theater literally 2 weeks in Iraq, and we did a cordon and knock. We would cordon off the area where we thought the target would be, and then the special guys would go in and kick the door in, go in and clear the rooms and so forth, and grab the guy, wrap him up, and bring him out. Well, this was like dusk, and so as they were in there quite a while, and there was a little bit of a crowd forming in front of us, and I had a driver to my left who was a private first class, and the crowd started kind of forming, and as he started to get nervous, they started coming toward us. Well, we had open door to vehicles. I was in the right side and the driver's side. Yeah. And I looked up and realized that there was a guy with a brick trying to hit me in the head with a brick. And I put my hand up to block the brick, and he jumps in the vehicle, and I had my pistol on my chest. And he was trying to pull the pistol out of my holster, and I was holding him, and my arm was hurt, and I'm trying to hold him, and he pulled his hair back, and I look at him, I look in his eyes. This guy was there to kill me, no doubt about it. And of course, my driver was panicked, and I really did not know what to do, and I just reached in my pocket. I had a knife on my side, and I just pulled his hair back, and I stabbed him.
Wow.
Out of panic. It was like I didn't really know what to do. Brand new in theater, brand new, and this isn't something you really plan for. And he fell down to the right by the vehicle, and I just got my weapon. I just pointed towards the crowd, and literally about a minute and a half later, they came running out, and I'll never forget it. The SEAL came up and saw the guy laying there, blood all over me, blood all over him. And he looked at me and said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I think so." He goes, "Well, welcome to Iraq, and let's go."
Hey.
And so, yeah, that was my first experience. And I remember that night I was in my, and of course the chaplain comes and said, "Hey, are you okay? I heard what happened. You doing okay?" I'm like, "I'm okay." Well, Herschel, the SEAL guy that said that, came and knocked on my little chew that I had there and said, I said, "Are you doing okay?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Just trust me, it gets easier. It gets much easier. It gets almost like, common." And I'm like, "Well, I don't want it to be common for me, brother. that's what you guys do and train to do. I'm not that guy."
Yeah.
And he smiled and he said, "But it won't bother you. It's not something that's going to really bother you. Just let it go." So that was my first experience in something, serious combat like that. And again, being a counterintelligence guy, my job is to find the enemy, and possibly even convert them to be, share information with us about what they're doing. Not really the guys kicking in doors and shooting people in the face. That's not, really what I'm trained to do. So that was an interesting deployment. And
I imagine that kind of shook you up. Oh,
it did. I would say that what really hit me is, again, I had an 8-month-old daughter.
Yeah.
And my wife had sent me a poster of her sitting up in her little yellow pajamas with a big smile on her face.
Oh, man.
And that, when I got in that night, I looked at that picture on the wall that I had my little chew, and I just broke down.
Yeah.
I thought, she could be fatherless at this age, at this time.
Mm-mm.
So,
all right, I'm getting teary-eyed thinking about it. Dude. I got a little daughter named Savannah as well. It's whew.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So that was but I will tell you, the one that I struggled with the most, Joe, and the one I want to share with you is just this most recent deployment I went on in Afghanistan. We were in a very small base in Kabul.
And so what year is this?
This is 2016.
Oh, okay, got it. So super recent.
Yeah. And it was a soft base. You can look up and see some of the aftermath of the attack. It's online. It was Camp Integrity. But what happened? This was a point where they were using a lot of the VBIEDs, which is our term for vehicle borne improvised explosive devices. And they were putting these big mortar rounds in vehicles and using them as bombs. And so the base that we were on had not been attacked in probably six years, and we were in a pretty stable place, a very small base, very limited personnel as far as like military members. There were a lot of civilians there. It was a headquarters for the SAW units, and we got complacent. Just to be honest with you, we got a little complacent. And what happened? I have a close friend. First of all, Drew was one of the guys that was my lifting partner, running partner, and there we were doing a lot of work together. And then there was a chaplain there, Will, who I got to be close friends with. And I was going to church with him, doing the chapels on Sunday mornings. Well, they drove a big truck up to the front gate, the insurgents did, and they detonated it. It tapped the front gate, and then unfortunately we had some 8 not military, but Afghan military guys. Militia, basically, that were our allies, that were kind of like our security personnel. They kept out front, and they were inside a very small corridor playing soccer when this truck came up and detonated. And those guys, I worked with them every day. They were sharing information. I brought them food all the time, at night, and they never knew what hit them. It literally shredded all of them. It vaporized some of them, shredded all of them, and then the insurgents, just kind of came and started blowing in. But
so where were you during this explosion?
I was interesting. I was in my room, little tiny room, right by the front gate. And I literally 30 seconds before the explosion, just hung up FaceTime with Sherry, my wife.
Wow.
And which is, I thank God for, because that had happened while we were mid sentence. She would have, really been upset. But in this boom collapsed, the building collapsed around me. And I knew exactly, because I'd heard them before multiple times. I knew what it was. So I grabbed my weapon. I literally had to crawl out, move debris out of the way to crawl out the door. And I was the second guy there to see them running on the base to engage them as they were coming on the base. And what had happened, both gates were almost knocked down by the bomb. 2 buildings were destroyed, mine and another one. But the second gate had not been fully knocked down. So one of the suicide bombers ran and threw his body on the second gate, detonated himself, and knocked down that second gate. And then they just started coming on. And so
it's like how many people are we talking about in these insurgents?
They had 8 of them. 8 of them coming on. And again, it was a small base. Their intent was to overrun our base.
Yeah.
And again, because we were complacent, we weren't really, just wasn't prepared for it. So as they're coming on, and it was, again, when the bomb went off, it turned all the power completely off. They destroyed the generators, and everything was just turned off, and it was pitch black. There was no illumination, no moon, no stars. So the city outside had some lights behind them. So all you can really do see is the silhouettes coming on the base from the lights out on the street. And as we're engaging these guys, and so Drew was engaging them, and he was literally 15 feet from me, and he was shot and killed. He was shot in the head. It was a catastrophic wound. Absolutely nothing you can do. And the worst part was there's just nothing you can do because they're still coming at you. There's not a whole lot.
And so you broke up for a second. I want to make sure everyone heard that. So this is your buddy Drew, your workout buddy.
Yes.
And he's right. He's within. He's
within about 10 or 15 feet from me on my right side, engaging them. Yeah. He got shot. Yeah. And so he went down, and which was horrible because number one, you can't help right now. It's not you're engaged. It's not like you can just stop everything, go over and say, hey, but it was a catastrophic wound. And the hardest part was once the firefight kind of slowed down a little bit. When I got to him, he was still breathing, but there was nothing to do. And that's a terrifying and horrifying emotional experience because you're still fighting for your life, yet you still have someone there you love and care about that's just dying right there, in front of you. It's terrible. So we continued to gauge. The firefight lasted about 2.5 hours because they were hiding behind vehicles. Again, it was dark. At one point, one of the insurgents ran towards us, and after he was engaged, he hit the ground, and he was about probably, I would say, about 20 yards from me, and it was a suicide bomber. He had detonated when he hit the ground, and so it blew me back, burst both my eardrums, put shrapnel on my face and hands, and knocked me down. And I thought this could be it. And it didn't knock me unconscious, but when I opened my eyes and kind of like shaking the stars, I couldn't hear anything. And I thought the next thing that I was going to see in my face was an AK-47 barrel, and that was going to be the end of it. But I looked up, and there was a young E5 reached down and said, "Come on, Chief, we got to go." And he picked me up and helped me, and we got back behind a T-wall for some protection. But if it wasn't for that kid, and I'd let him know today, I still talk with him, and I let him know that, hey, he probably saved my life by getting me up the way he did. But yeah, so we thought we had eliminated the threat. And one of my good friends who was there was the first sergeant there, George. George was literally clearing from one T-wall to another, and one of the insurgents had hidden himself underneath the vehicle along one of our walls there. We did not know he was there. And as George ran across the T-wall, he exposed himself, and he got shot by this guy under the truck 3 times, one through his kidneys, one through his liver, and one through his spine. And then he went down, and we couldn't really determine where the shooter was, where the insurgent was. We knew he was in the vicinity of this vehicle. So we ended up getting a striker vehicle. We just drove around the base and put over there, and we just lit him up with a 50 caliber and just smoked the vehicle, smoked him, just making sure he was done. Wow. We put George on the medevac when he got him out of there. He died 3 times on the way to the medevac. But he ended up surviving. And wow. That's part of the story I'll share with you, but we'll finish up here what happened in Afghanistan. So after we thought the firefight was over, we had a gaping hole in our wall out there on the perimeter. And again, there wasn't a whole lot of us out there. So I ran upstairs and put my gear on, Kevlar, my OTV vest, because I was out there fighting in jeans, my Crocs, and a T-shirt.
And this is what time at night?
This was like 10:30 at night.
Okay, yeah, it's pitch black.
Yeah, and and it's just and I'll tell you what, I'll plug for Crocs. They're pretty good out there on the battlefield. But so this thing lasted, and it's around 3:00 in the morning. And I told my boss, the colonel, so I got to go out there. We had a team of Marines that were collectors, human, like collecting, intelligence collectors, and we got to go out there and fill this gap. And they'd already worked on calling up a company of Rangers in Bagram to fly down there to give us support for extra security. But it was going to take a while to get them down there. And so as I'm getting ready to leave, my boss says, "Hey, Chief, you need to go see the medics." And I said, "I don't have time, man. I've got to get out there. We've got a hole in the fence. They could be coming through again." And I said, "It's a direct order to go see the medics." And I said, "What's so?" Now, again, Joe, you have to think about this. It's 100% adrenaline. I mean, you're like jacked up right now. And I said, "What's so important?" I go, "Now, I've got to get down there right now." And she said, "Chief, you got a piece of metal sticking out of your nose and blood and pus coming out of both your ears. You go see the medics." I never even felt it, didn't know it. And I went down to the medics, and they pulled out this piece of metal and wiped it off with a gauze. "Yep, you're good to go," and sent me on my way.
And your ears are still ringing at this point?
They were ringing, and they felt swollen. But it was interesting that when it first happened, I couldn't hear a thing, but I was able to hear. So we get down there, and as we're walking out there to the front of the gate, I'm stepping over like these objects, and I think I'm stepping over parts of the truck, but it's so dark you couldn't see. All you could see was something dark on the ground. And then we get out there and we spread out. We kneel down, and then from probably about 3:30 to 4 in the morning until 8 in the morning, we sat there waiting for the next wave to come in, which it didn't come. Praise the Lord. And so about 8 o'clock, a company of Rangers showed up, and they said, "Hey, Chief, we got this. You can go back." And got the guys. We turned around and we started walking back. And Joe, as we started walking back, it was, it's in August, so it's in Afghanistan, so it's hot. And I realized it wasn't parts of the truck that I was stepping over. It was, a head and shoulders here, a waist to torso, legs there, and a head wide open by itself sitting over here. I mean, there was just body parts everywhere, just all over the field. And it was those guys that I had worked with every day and cut up with and talked to and brought them food. And I remember one of them, this is where kind of like the nightmares started creeping in later on after it was all said and done. One of the guys that I got kind of close to, we had a language barrier, obviously, but he was working on his English, and I was trying to work on some of my Posh. But he was face down. His waist down was gone, and he was face down and just charred black. And I recognized him from his shirt he was wearing, the shirt that was on, the burnt shirt that was on him. And I just couldn't believe it. And, it was just really tough. And as we got back there, they started kind of rebuilding, and we had to call in some of the leadership from the Afghans to come in and like cover the bodies, and they have a procedure they do because of their religion. So it was a difficult and long, longest night of my life. And I remember when I got back into the office that morning, I pulled up, got in the office, got cleaned up, and pulled up the internet. First thing on it was already showing that there had been an attack on Camp Integrity. And my wife, the news hawk that she is, I'm sure she had already seen it. And so I called her, and I just went telling her, "I'm okay."
Man, dude, you're making me tear up, dude. Whew.
So that was get through that part, but that was it was tough. It was one of those moments that you're not prepared for. You don't think about that. And so when I got back, when I redeployed, of course they make us go through a bunch of redeployment stuff. You have to sit down and talk with everybody, the doctors and everything. And I had I'd been awarded the Purple Heart because of what happened, and obviously award Bronze Stars and all these different things. But I will tell you, I'm honored to have those awards, but I was just happy to be back home with my family. Because at that point, I had we had 4 little ones and my wife. But I didn't realize what effects those events were going to have on me. And that's kind of one of the things I really want to share with you and your listeners, because I was one of those guys that was kind of like arrogant in the sense that, nothing's going to bother me. I'm strong-willed. I'm good. I'm solid. My brain's fine. I'm mentally sound. I'm spiritually sound. I can deal with anything. I can get through it. It's no issue. But that's not always the case, no matter how strong you are, because with mine, it started to creep up probably about 8 months to a year after it all took place. I started having these nightmares, and when I talked about the guy that the Afghan that was face down in my recurring dream, he turns around, looks at me, and just says, "Hey, why did this happen?" And I was dealing with that, and we did the memorial for Drew. And this is really the hardest thing for me, because I had a 9-year-old daughter at the time I left. And as you know, I'm a big fisherman, kayak fisherman, and I literally just took her out on the kayak about 2 days before I deployed. And in one of the pictures, Drew was sitting on his tandem kayak with his daughter, who's 9 years old. The pictures. When I saw that, I just lost it. And that's kind of where I started getting angry and just questioning some things, questioning why things happen the way they do. And I've always been told, and I'm sure you have too. I think we have very similar, child that's growing up, that mom made us go to church every day, and you learn those principles, the biblical principles that, God has a plan. God's will is not it's perfect. But we don't understand it, and I was questioning, why did I have to go through this? Why did I have to see this? And, I found myself being angry, with rage, self-pity, and having a hard time dealing with it. And there was times where I'd literally be walking through a parking lot, and I would just all of a sudden go into a panic like that. I would get anxiety, and just almost as if the truck was fixing to go off again, or somewhere in the parking lot. And it was affecting me. I couldn't go out with my family to events where we wanted to go, like a crowd, whether it be like an event, Busch Gardens, any of those types. I didn't want to be around a bunch of people. And so I was really trying to figure out a way to deal with this. And my wife she's a saint. She's a saint. She knew I had issues I was working through. And so I will tell you, one of the things that I leaned on and helped me get through this was being on the water. I told you that. So I got out there. This is where I started to hear God speak to me and gave me some pretty hard truth bombs that I had to swallow, and it was tough. But he was very direct. And I remember I wrote one thing down. I was sitting there, and I was like, I was angry, and I was asking, why is this? I was being short with my kids, and that's not me, I kept reliving that night, and I try and block it out. It would just keep coming back, and it just made me angry. And then one morning I was just in the water, and I had it written down here, and I was just praying for peace. I was just asking for peace in my heart and in my mind. And I heard him say, "Listen, your hurt and your anger is not from me." He said, "Your hurt is based on your own selfishness." And I was like, here I am, and I'm angry. And now he's going to call me selfish. And I'm like, wow. And he says, "Have I not created this vast ocean? Have I not performed unexplainable miracles? Did I not knit you inside your mother's womb? Yet you question my will for you." And I was like, oh man,
So, and you heard all this while you were out in the water in your kayak?
Yes, it was before daylight. The sun was just ready to come up, and Joe, I would go out there and I wouldn't even fish for the first hour. So I would just sit there, anchor down, and just listen to the water. And that just kind of hit me like, wow, and I just would continue to pray and ask God to give me something that is just going to help release this anxiety, help release this pain, this survivor's guilt is what I'm, clinically they tell me, survivor's guilt. And he would continue just to witness to me and just bring me peace when I'm on the water. And I can't explain to you, when you're alone on the water, and that's the perfect time, and perfect time to actually pray and just listen, because the water's peaceful unless it's 20 knots out there, but you don't want to be on the water 20 knots. But it's a good time that God will speak to you, and he has spoken to me And my wife was so compassionate about, hey, I would say I'm gonna go out on the water this morning for a while. Not a word of resentment, which was awesome.
No, you can't. Sounds like you came back a more godly man every time you go hit the water, and more kind and loving. So
yes.
Yeah, for any of you guys watching, there were definitely some onions in both our cameras. So what was the toughest part? Is it, and you actually mentioned it, going like you're 100 miles an hour, right? Like, I mean, you're just fight or flight. Yeah. Like I've talked about anxiety attacks. I mean, you're going 100 miles an hour. You're fighting for your life, literally. And then all of a sudden to go through an experience like that and to come back home, and now everything's, supposed to be back to normal, and you're supposed to be normal. And that's tough. And then you mentioned the survival guilt of, watching one or two of your best friends get shot and one dying right there next to you. I mean, obviously I know it's all tough, but what was the worst part?
Well, I think the worst part, like I mentioned, one of the things, your brain and your heart, they're flesh and blood. So they react to things in a fleshly way, right? So like you mentioned, like I told you in that note, when you're in theater, there's 100% adrenaline all the time, because there's always a chance that someone's going to shoot you, or a mortar round's going to drop on top of you. There's always that 100% adrenaline. And I was sleeping at night, literally with one eye open and my arm on my weapon, at night, waiting for the next boom to happen.
Wow.
And so your body, your mind's going 100 miles an hour down a highway. That's kind of the analogy that this chaplain friend gave me. And so when you land back in the States, when you get off that plane, your mind and your body is still going 100 miles an hour down that highway. Yet what we're supposed to do is completely turn it off overnight and wake up the next morning and you're back to normal life. Well, that's not how body works. That's not how physically we can just do that. And so we call it the reentry, the decompression. So it usually takes about 3 to 6 months for you to get back to normal. But for a situation like some of us go through, it doesn't happen that fast. It takes a long time. And the toughest part for me, like you said, was when I would close my eyes sometimes at night, I would just go back and see Drew, or I'd go back and see that moment that he was injured, and having to it was a process. And that was one of the things I had the most difficult with. And I think that's a lot of what most veterans suffer with and struggle with, is because they have these recurring memories or flashbacks of those situations they had almost no control over, and they can't change it. And so they take it down to a point of depression where they just feel like they can't recover. But I'm here to tell you right now, there is victory in Jesus, and there's absolutely no reason why someone that has suffered like that can recover, because they can, as long as they realize that they can't do it by themselves.
So did you struggle with God? You kind of talked about it, that you were angry and certainly just, it's tough for anyone to understand, right, why that would happen. Kind of talk about that journey. I know you'd shared Psalms 28:7 with me in your email, that you kept hearing that in your mind. Talk about that whole journey, because I think that's something that a lot of, not just veterans, anyone who's gone through a tough time needs to hear. And I don't know that you'll ever get those scenes out of your head. You might, I don't know. But when you have God as your savior, and I'll let you kind of talk more about that. I know it can get better. And I've heard your, parts of your story and your transformation and your journey. And it sounds like you're healing, which is awesome.
I am. But I will tell you, and I think every Christian, and I'll be willing to bet my paycheck on it, I believe every Christian at one point in their life has questioned their faith. I think that's natural.
Yeah.
And that happened, and I remember having some very, very deep and serious discussions with my wife, who is a powerful woman of God and a direct line to God, I think, whenever she prays. Yeah. I was to the point where I was like, babe, I just don't know anymore, because if God is real, if he's really what's what's best for us, what he's looking out for us. If he loves us like we're being, taught, and what we, then why would he allow something like this to happen? Why would he allow the enemy, which is what we consider the enemy, to have a victory like that? Why would he allow that? Because you read in the Bible, I mean, everyone knows he's gone and destroyed nations on behalf of his people. Why would he let one of my friends die like that? And I question that, and I even told Sherry, I don't even know if it's real. But then there were some things that reminded me that, for example, there were situations that night that happened. One thing I didn't share with you is when I got picked up by that sergeant and moved away from where I was laying down after the blast. So we have a system. We call it the blimp. Basically, it's a huge blimp type thing that's just way up above the base. And when the explosion took place, the camera zoomed around and it focused in, and it caught the entire battle on video. Okay, so I was able to go back and watch everything on video.
Oh man!
And when that young sergeant picked me up and moved me, Joe, I'm not exaggerating when I say 30 to 32 seconds later, a grenade had been launched from the enemy and landed right where I was laying and exploded on impact. Had I been staying there, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. So little things like that have happened. There were little miracles along the way that reminded me, and it was a process. Again, it was just, as I thought through things, I was reminded through my, through that little voice that you have of things that happened, that it wasn't something that I controlled. It was something that he was controlling. And one of those things that I talked about questioning your faith, I think we all have, but at the end of the day, that's where faith comes in. There's things that we're never going to be able to answer. There's things we're never going to be able to understand, because, God's will is perfect, but his plan for us is his plan for us. And we won't know what it is until we actually get to heaven and say, hey, he can explain to us why he did certain things. I'm sure there's going to be an answer. I have no doubt, but we certainly are not, it's beyond our comprehension to be able to understand that.
Yeah.
And it took some very serious prayer, a lot of conversations with my pastor, a lot of conversations with Sherry, to get through that. And again, if you just have that faith that, even though we have to go through these struggles, God put some of his most godly men through struggles to strengthen their faith. So, and Sherry reminded me of that as well. Look at what Joseph went through. I mean, he was sold by his own brothers and, charged, accused of assaulting, a woman and put in jail, and he still kept his faith. And then God made the most powerful man in Egypt. She makes that example all the time when I start questioning things. So, but God does, I think God does put us through things to stretch us, to realize that he is in control, and maybe even to break us down so we come back to him in a stronger and more powerful way.
Yeah, and I feel like he's calling you to continue to share the story. I'm super grateful that you reached out to me to do this. As you probably saw, I mean, I was tearing up just thinking through that civilian part of it. When you start thinking about a spouse and kids and the loved ones, and you got guys like you, I mean, risking it all for our freedom. So, man, thank you so much. And I would encourage you to keep telling the story. I mean, it can almost be, a book that, that's really just your overall journey. And I want to talk a little bit too more about just the water, because we've had a few other podcasts, not like this, but talking about, vets in general and just the power of water and the healing process. Talk a little bit more about that. I thought it was really cool. You mentioned sometimes the first hour you're just taking it all in, and are you praying, meditating? Well, what do you?
I am.
Yeah.
I'll have things, and it's funny because I'll have things like that I want to cover in my prayer time when I go out there.
Yeah.
And whether it be for just praying for each one individual of my kids individually, of having God's will and that they're out there, shining God's light and understanding, and just pray for my wife, because with her homeschooling everyone and she's always busy. But for me, it was just going out there and anchoring down and just watching the sun come up and realizing, man, this is just God's paintbrush creating another beautiful day here in Florida. and just meditating and praying and listening, focusing on, just the environment. And what's amazing is the water wakes up too. It's amazing that as the sun's coming up, you start hearing the activity of the waters, the mullet start jumping, and the fish are moving. And that was absolute therapy for me. It was peaceful. It was calm, and it allowed me to be out there by myself with nobody around but me and the water and God. And I did that literally, Joe. I would go out there in the morning before daylight, and I would come home way after dark.
Wow.
That's how long in a kayak. So along with a great tan, but I came back with a lot more inner peace, and just knowing that I'm not in control. Once you release and just realize, I'm not in control of this thing. All I can do is just depend on God to show me which route He wants me to go, and keep faith. But as I fish, I'm telling you, throwing out there and catching a fish, just watching that top water blow up. It's exciting, and it's a thrill, and it's also just, I'm sure most fishermen understand this. It is a peace and a fun. It's therapeutic no matter what you're going through.
Yeah.
And that's kind of it really helped me get through that.
Yeah, I found that those sunsets and sunrise as well. I mean, there's just something magical about that, and to be grateful for another day in the morning, or finishing up another amazing day. I had one recently, the end of Davis Island. I went out there to go catch fish, and I saw this just breathtaking sunrise, and I just stopped and sat down on the rocks out there. Didn't even wet a line for a solid 30 minutes.
Amen.
And it was just, man, it was awesome. So
soak it in. That's the best.
So what next for you, man? Are you I assume you're done getting deployed over there, or what? Well,
that's we'll see. I mean, as long as I'm wearing this uniform, there's always that opportunity they could tag me to have to go and do that.
Yep.
Not that I'm really excited about going and doing that, but if that's what they tell me to do, that's what I do, right? But I will share with you, and not a whole lot of people know about this, but all your viewers will know this now. I plan on retiring. I'm going to drop my retirement probably around August timeframe.
Cool.
So I'll have about 24 years of doing this, and I think it's about time to switch sides and see what the civilian sector has for me.
Cool, brother. Well, I'm proud of you. God bless you, and thank you for the service, and everyone who has served out there. I know we're going to have a lot of veterans and active military listening to this, so just thank you all. Man, the courage that all of you have to show, and man, your story, jeepers, that was crazy. Like I said, I got goosebumps and teared up just thinking of that. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Joe, for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, what an amazing story. And so, depending on where you're listening or watching, we'll put a whole show notes, and I'll put a couple of quotes with your permission from the email and some of the biblical quotes and stuff that have helped you out personally. And
Absolutely.
I'll put those at saltstrong.com/unchurched. So that's saltstrong.com/unchurched. Check them out all there. Tony, thank you so much, my friend. I hope to see you out on the water really, really soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks, Joe. Take care, buddy.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul.